Sorry.
We're good.
All right. Well, welcome to the Monday, June 28th, 2021 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted you're able to join us this evening. I'd like to call tonight's meeting to order and ask that the clerk or the assistant city manager read our virtual meeting notice.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council are present at the meeting through electronic means, and members of the public are welcome to view the meeting on the city's website, www.fallschurchva.gov/council meetings, and on FCC TV, Cox Channel 11, RCN 2, Verizon 35, and you can also watch the meeting streaming on YouTube by looking for City of Falls Church YouTube channel. Public comments were accepted virtually, will be accepted virtually for those who signed up in advance of the meeting. They may either speak on public hearing items or provide general public comment. The written public comments, including those regarding public hearing items, will be accepted at cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. That's an email address, cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. Comments are sent to council daily and summarized and presenting during the written comments agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you call roll, please?
I will. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Litkenhouse?
Here.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter?
Here.
Thank you, Council.
All right. Thank you. And again, welcome to all. If you'd be so kind, please rise and for the Pledge of Allegiance with me, if you could, wherever you might be. The flag will display, or the screen will display a flag. So if you could join me again, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, let's move on to the receipt of public comment. Madam Clerk.
Yes, sir. I will do the summary of written comments first. From Mary Chavez of 215 Lawton Street provided comments and expressed concerns about proposed changes to the T zoning district, as did Leslie Rye of 214 Lawton Street. Elizabeth Terr, Fairfax County Attorney, forwarded the Fairfax County Board's objections to any further expansion of the economic development area at Westfall Church. Amaya Lambert expressed concern about the George Mason name being displayed on Broad Street while the Juneteenth holiday was observed. Steve Miller of 1005 Jennifer Lane forwarded information about construction vehicles staging on Grove Avenue. Steve Callanan provided a letter and information opposing the renaming of the high school. He also copied the City Council on an additional letter to the school board on the same topic and included responses to his letters from other alumni. The Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation provided recommended locations for bike lanes and their Great Falls, Little Falls traffic calming and pedestrian safety project, and requested to meet with City Council in work session. And that was it for written comments.
All right. Well, thank you very much. How about public comment? Is there anyone present now who'd like to speak?
I didn't have anybody sign up in advance. I did get an email from Mr. Tim Stevens, and he wanted to let you know that he supported the purchase of electric vehicles for the police department, which is on the agenda, on the consent agenda tonight.
All right. So no other speakers for tonight?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to council requests. Are there any council requests? Let's see who's got their hand up. I'm sorry, it's not showing.
Sorry, it's me, Dave. It's Ross.
All right, Ross, what you got?
More of a question for Wyatt and staff. These letters and comments that have been coming in about the school name change, I know that school board has been copied, but it's been somewhat inconsistent in terms of who they're directed towards. The folks that have written in, have we made it abundantly clear that that is a school board decision and should be directed to the school board, anyone that's written into council expecting comments or discussion at a public meeting?
So I have not been. Let me ask the city clerk if that has been a response provided to those who've written in.
It has not, because they have actually asked for it to be forwarded to city council. So, I mean, I think they sent things to school board and to council specifically.
Okay. Well, I've been writing back to folks. I just want to make it clear that, you know, if they're expecting an action from city council, that's not our domain. And I think that's important for them to understand that.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. In response to the flooding that we've heard from some residents on Hillwood, I wanted to see, one, whether we can follow up to understand whether the planned stormwater improvements will help those residents, and then two, as we look at recommendations for the ARPA money, whether that can help supplement additional backflow preventers, either paying for more than the $2,000 credit in the program we established last year, or some sort of different program, because I do know that stormwater is called out as something that does qualify.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And both stormwater and sanitary sewer investments are eligible uses of ARPA dollars. And so that will be, I think, in our list of recommendations to City Council for the use of the city's ARPA allocation. In addition to those types of fixes, backflow prevention devices, because the complaints were from surcharges through the sanitary sewer system, that those backflow devices, that program is available to those homeowners. And so we've taken a renewed effort to push that information out. But as is noted, we might be able to provide even more assistance on that with ARPA dollars. In addition, we can use funds to have a more thorough infiltration and inflow study of the Hillwood area. We also have the West Columbia area, where we had some instances back 2 years ago that is part of that study as well. So we'll provide council with an update on that larger consulting effort as well.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. I'm compelled to note that the latest reports of fully vaccinated Falls Churchers tell us that since last week, Monday, June 21st, when we had 56.8% of the population fully vaccinated, we've gone up only to 57.6% of the population in the past week. So I would like to renew my call for us to use whatever means necessary to focus the public's attention on the lead of this newsletter, which we received today, which is the Delta variant and the implications of its highly contagious and aggressive nature, and urge the city through its communications channels to continue to do whatever we can to push that fully vaccinated number up. Thanks.
I think our numbers are in the 70s, Phil. I don't have anything at my fingertips right now, but I thought that was part of a regional call today, actually. So I don't think our numbers, what you've just described, I don't have an information right at my fingertips to dispute it, but maybe the city manager could see if he could round something up and maybe send that off to you. But I don't think I think our number is significantly higher than what you just quoted.
Well, all I know is what I read in the paper. I mean, this email goes out to all points city. If there's better information, which was alluded to last week, then that would be thrilling news to hear. And maybe at some point we could reconcile the understanding that some have, that there are those in the federal and military branches that have been vaccinated and those are not being counted for us. If that's the case, then we have a public health reporting problem in addition to a vaccine problem. So maybe the vaccine problem is not as significant, and that would be great news. But we definitely have a public health reporting problem if there is that big a disparity between what we put out every week and what others understand to be the case.
And I could provide an update from the health department during the city manager's report. I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you.
And the mayor, the mayor's camera appears to be frozen, so we may be having a technical difficulty on the mayor's end. We'll give just a moment for that to be rectified. Looks like he's leaving to come back in.
That'll teach me to talk back to the mayor, I guess. I didn't get frozen up.
Yeah, hi, this is Dave Tarter. I'm back. I don't know what just happened. Maybe it's just me, but I'm here at City Hall. So anyway, my apologies for whatever technical glitch just happened. Mr. Snyder, did you have a comment or has it already been made?
No, thanks a lot, Mr. Mayor. We were waiting for your reappearance here. So, thank you. A couple things. First of all, the CACT did ask for a workshop meeting with the City Council, so I'm wondering if we could schedule that. Second thing is the Falls Church News Press is celebrating its 30th anniversary, and I'm wondering if we could prepare a proclamation about the importance of that paper in being a diary of daily life here in Falls Church. Those are really the two things. The third thing is really to back up both Councilmember Duncan and Hardy's requests, both important. And I did note that in the Falls Church News Press, there was a full-page ad, I think, from the paper on vaccinations this last time. So we're clearly making an effort to do it, but I think sort of getting the numbers right. I have to believe we're doing better than 50%, but let's prove it. I think that was it for tonight. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lichtenhouse, did you have another?
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. Mr. Snyder just reminded me. There was a question that came about last week as part of a request from the Falls Church News Press about reanimating that city section in the newspaper, if there was a commitment to do that for communication to the community. I don't know if we've had that discussion, if that is something that has been discussed at the mayor's meeting or otherwise.
It has been, and I've promised to have a plan by how we could do that and sustain it over the long term as well.
Great. All right. We'll be talking about that in the coming weeks, possibly. What?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That's it.
All right. Mr. Snyder, do you have another question or comment?
I don't know. Thank you.
Celeste, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lichtenhouse. I did neglect. I was going to mention that letter from Mr. Benton from the News Press, and I realized that staff is working on that request, but thank you. And I did speak with the CACT chair today, and we have them scheduled for the July 19th work session to come and speak to you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Unless there are any other council requests, I suggest we move on to the report of the city manager. Ms. Hiscott, sorry.
Just on the scheduling with the boards and commissions, do we have a date scheduled for the ESC as well then? We've got CACT. Did we specify a date? Just want to make sure I'm communicating back.
We are trying to get a mutually convenient date. I have it penciled in as August 2nd, but we need to confirm that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else, or should we move on to the report of the city manager? Mr. Shields?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. I want to start my report off with a note of some retirements in the city. Then I'll discuss the Independence Day celebrations that are planned in the city, and then wrap things up with an update on vaccination. But first, this past week, we celebrated the retirement of Detective and Captain in our police department, Sonia Richardson, and we lauded her service to the city and her vigilance in protecting victims of crime and seeking justice through her really hard work and dedication and perseverance as a crime investigator in the city of Falls Church. So we celebrated her great achievements. This coming week, we will mark the retirement of 4 important people in our DPW operations, and that includes Cliff Rector, who oversees our fleet, Orlando, who works in our facilities management, and Leroy Holland, who's been working on our street crews, and Robert Goff, who's our superintendent of operations. And we will note the 4 of their retirements this week on July 1st in a celebration out at the property yard.
What time is that, Wyatt?
I'll get a note out of when that time is. We have not widely advertised it, partly just due to a desire, I think, of those members of staff to have a staff recognition or retirement party, but we'll certainly get that date out to the city council. That'll be this Thursday. And then one more that I will note: after 50 years of service to the city, our crossing guard officer Audrey Luffman will be retiring, and she joins the ranks of our legendary longest-serving public servants, and she has looked after our little ones on their route to school for a half a century, and we're planning her retirement celebration at the end of August. In just a few months. So just wanted to note those individuals and thank them for their service. With respect to Independence Day, just a few things to note that will be special about that day in the City of Falls Church. We will join with VPIS, the Village Preservation and Improvement Society. They will have the traditional reading of the founding documents at 2 p.m. at the Falls Church, and those readings will include a public reading of the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, Emancipation Proclamation, and other key documents in our nation's founding and history. Later in the day, we will have actually all day long, the Rec and Parks Department is sponsoring a Declaration celebration scavenger hunt, which will start at 9 a.m. and run through 6:30 p.m. You can go to the city web site and homepage to find out more information how to participate in that scavenger hunt. And we will have live music at Cherry Hill Park with a concert that starts at 4:30 in the afternoon to help us celebrate Independence Day in the city. We will not be having fireworks this year, and that is due to the ongoing construction, and now it's really all outdoor work, the site work that is happening for the new high school, and that has precluded our doing fireworks there. We are looking forward to, with the fire marshal's approval, or pending the fire marshal's approval, returning fireworks to the high school next year. And then lastly, in terms of the vaccination efforts, well, we did have a call today with the governor, and we also had a call with the health department on Friday, and I'll just try to share a few notes from both of those calls. First, with respect to the governor, and the mayor can certainly jump in on this report, but he joined the mayors and chairs today on their weekly call. He did provide an update on the vaccine rollout, and noted that there is a shift now from the mass vaccine clinics, which we've seen here in Fairfax Health District as well, to more targeted boots on the ground vaccination outreach efforts. That statewide message by the governor today was also amplified by our own Dr. Gloria Adua-Yinsu in her report last Friday, where they are soon to be rolling out a program whereby if you're having an event that will attract a lot of people, that they would like to be contacted, and they'd be willing to send vaccination teams out to join you at your public event so that the vaccine can be available to people who are participating in those events. I think those typically will be targeting larger events, with large numbers of people to try to make them as effective as possible. But volunteer groups will be able to contact the health department and have those sort of boots on the ground, smaller mobile units come out for more targeted vaccination efforts. The governor also discussed briefly some of the work that is being done in preparation for the General Assembly special session that will be on August 2nd. And that is the session by which the General Assembly will appropriate at least a portion of the ARPA allocation that has gone directly to the state. That is $4.3 billion. I don't think, he noted that he did not think that all of that allocation will be allocated in one go by the General Assembly, but they will at least lay out the big strategic framework and appropriate the first big chunk of it. The governor also noted in his report that as he's going around the state, he's been talking to many businesses and about the difficulty of finding workers for their businesses, particularly restaurants, but other businesses as well. And so he is trying to engage with people across the state about what the state can do to help people back into the workforce to meet those labor needs. In terms of the numbers on vaccination, statewide, he did lay out some numbers that over 70% of adults have at least one shot. And so when you translate that into the Falls Church's numbers, we're now at 76% of adults, i.e. 18 or older, have received at least one dose of vaccine. 68% of adults are fully vaccinated. That does not include federal doses. And statewide, there have been 426,000 doses administered directly by the Department of Defense and Veterans Administration to Virginians. And that's about 5% of the overall population. So one rough calculation could be that you would just take Falls Church's numbers and add 5% to them. That's not a scientific way to do it. We do, with our proximity to the Pentagon, do have a large part of our workforce that may have gotten vaccination through the federal government. We just don't have those numbers broken down at the local level. In terms of the entire population, which is what people look to in terms of ultimately for herd immunity, 65% of Falls Church has received one dose, and 58% has received both doses or fully vaccinated. So that's an update on the vaccination effort. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, Ms. Hardy has one.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Thanks for the update on the vaccinations. I think following on Phil's questions, I think we really just have a denominator issue. So I think President Biden has been using adult population. I think Virginia Department of Health also publishes the adult population. I think we've been communicating eligible population. And so I think the mix-up may just frankly be what the denominator is. So I think it makes sense for us to be consistent. I don't know whether our communications can pull from eligible or adult population just so we're all using the same denominator numbers. My second request is, it's great that we're using the Falls Church News Press, but per last week's conversation about targeting your efforts to non-English speaking newspapers, has there been any progress on that kind of effort since last week?
I do not know, so I'll need to get back with you on that.
Thank you. I do think that kind of effort is important, especially as we talk about reaching the people who really most need it.
Mr. Duncan?
Just wonder if our fall festival is a big enough event to warrant one of those mobile vaccine efforts.
I think that we don't have the details yet on that program. And in fact, I probably have shared it prematurely, technically, with the City Council, because Fairfax Health is still building that mobile vaccination program. but those are the types of events that certainly are in our mind about having vaccine teams there, so that could be something that people who come to our events could avail themselves of.
Okay, that'd be great. Well, you've got till September 11th to work on it, so
That's right.
even if you broke the news too early, there's still time to get us onto the queue there.
I was just going to add on to that immediately brought to mind the Falls Church Education Foundation run for the schools. And if we have any vaccine that can be younger than 12 by that time, that would be a really great opportunity to bring in a mobile unit as well, because there are about 800 people there. So I think that would fit into that category nicely too, and maybe target some of the younger population if that's an opportunity. So thanks.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Shields or comments for Mr. Shields? Okay, let's move on then to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk.
Yes, sir. We have 2 items that are related. Would you like me to read those together?
Yes.
These are on first reading. We have TR 20-29, resolution to grant special exception entitlement amendment for a mixed-use development project with a building height up to 15 stories on approximately 9.77 acres of land located at 7124 Leesburg Pike, portions of real property code numbers 51-221-006 and -007 on application by Falls Church Gateway Partners. And then we also have TR 20-30, resolution to grant special exception site plan section 48-488.B3 for a mixed-use development project with a building height up to 15 stories on approximately 8.82 acres of land located at 7124 Leesburg Pike, portions of real property code numbers 51-221-006 and 007 on application by Falls Church Gateway Partners.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. What I would propose in terms of the way we would work through these items is that we start with the staff report, and Carly Audrey is prepared to just lay out what the request is with these 2 items from the development team. Nancy Vincent is on this call as well for any questions with respect to affordable housing. We have the development team on the call. They have a few slides just to describe the SEE amendment request and the 35,000 square feet of additional square footage for the senior component. So they can describe that, make sure everybody has information about this request. In addition, the city attorney has prepared a draft motion to allow the council, if it chooses, to go into closed session for the purpose of receiving legal advice on the implications in terms of the entitlements and the comprehensive agreement of this issue. And so the purpose of that would be to receive the city attorney's legal advice, which I would recommend be done in closed session if that is the council's desire. So this would be the potential way to handle this order. And so the first up would be Carly Audrey, just to provide an overview of the request and provide that staff report.
All right, thank you, Ms. Audrey.
Thank you, City Council. So the City Council is requested to refer a request from FCGP to increase the gross square footage of the proposed senior housing building from the current maximum limit of 225,000 gross square feet to 260,000 gross square feet. And this is part of the current applications for the SEE amendment and the SESP for phase 1. And council is requested to send this refer this request to School Board and Planning Commission to review and provide recommendations. The primary purpose of the additional square footage is to provide for a higher quantity of smaller amenity spaces that would be spread throughout the building, as opposed to fewer larger community or amenity spaces. And this would help prevent congregation in large numbers. And so in the event of a pandemic or similar scenario, lockdowns could occur floor by floor. The additional square footage would result in an additional floor from 14 to 15 stories. However, the building would still meet the 15-story limitation that's set by the zoning code, as well as the approved special exception entitlement that was approved in July 8th of 2019. The estimated unit count is 215, and that is below the SEE approved unit count of 225. Staff is currently reviewing this request, and comments will be finalized this week. There is not expected to be a significant change in previous analysis or impacts as a result of this request.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just because the timing is included in the report on page 32, and that's includes an anticipated schedule that includes a referral tonight, school board and planning commission meetings, and a city council work session in July, and a final council action on July 2nd. The report also includes updates on the ADU program negotiations and the voluntary concessions. The remaining voluntary concessions are really this additional request for senior housing square footage and finalization of the affordable housing program.
All right, is that it? Is that your report?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, and I will note for the council, in terms of the affordable housing for the senior component, we are working with the development team on that. I think on that issue we have made some progress, and let me just ask Nancy Vincent if she has anything she wants to speak to with respect to affordable housing, both in terms of the charts that are laid out here, which is the affordable housing with respect to the multifamily and condo projects. A separate issue is the affordable housing with respect to the senior component. The two kind of similar issues, but they have different issues sort of driving the economics and the benefit to our residents behind those two different classes of affordable housing. So Nancy, do you want to just speak briefly to what the staff recommendation is with respect to the multifamily / condo piece of it, and maybe just an overview of the nature of the discussions we're having, which have not yet been finalized with respect to the senior?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So as regarding the affordable dwelling unit contribution for the apartment and the condos, the baseline request is that 6% of all apartments be part of the voluntary concessions to and available to households who are have a household income of 60% of the area median income or under. And in this case, that would equate to 32 apartments. The developer, in response to staff request, also developed a proposal for apartments that would be available to households with 40%, 50%, 55%, and 60% household income. And that would equate to 22 or 4% of the apartments. And that is a staff recommendation, is that we accept the proposal for the 4% units in order to meet not a need for apartments or for homes that serve our lower income residents. In regard to the senior housing, the discussion is around having the 6% of units available in the independent living property, or to have a cash payment. And so the senior properties would have independent living, assisted living, and memory care. And rather than having these units, there could be an annual payment to the city of cash in lieu. So the discussion was around what that payment would be and how that would work. And part of the appeal to having a payment is it would allow for a resident to have a continuum of care. So once somebody is in independent living, they could move to assisted living or memory care depending on what their needs. So there is an appeal in that case for the cash. So I'm happy to answer any questions about either of those programs.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, let's go ahead and hear from Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Nancy, so let me just make sure I understand. So we have a certain amount of money available for affordable housing here. We can either get 60% AMI and 32 units, or a lower AMI, more deeply affordable, giving us ranging from 40 to 60, giving us 22 units.
Correct.
That basically the choice facing us. It's the same amount of money either way. It's just a matter of we get 22 or 32 units.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Well, I know in the grander scheme of things, 10 is not a big number, of course, but in Little Falls Church, 10 is a big number. I just wonder what other folks think about, the business proposition of these are fairly, I think, expensive apartments, obviously, because it's a highly desirable location right near Metro and shops and so forth. The 22 people who get the golden ticket for affordable housing here are going to be very fortunate. I just wonder if, prior to now, we've been focused on trying to drive our numbers of units, numbers of households served, and that 32 number, to me, is more appealing and is a better business proposition. But I'd be curious what others think about that. I mean, I would like to see down the road, the Amazon money go into affordable housing right across the line with our neighbors in Fairfax and the Metro development. And, let's let Amazon spend their money to provide really deeply affordable numbers, rather than the numbers that the cost that would be attached to us. The difference between 22 and 32 is, somewhat significant in Falls Church. I don't know what others think about this. If it's something I'm stressing over for no reason, then let me know.
All right. Other thoughts, questions? All right, let's move. Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah. So Phil, I'll respond to that directly. I agree with you. I'd actually prefer to have the 32, and frankly, the original unit mix that was offered at that 60% AMI, I thought was the better option, and something that I thought was appropriate for this site. So I will say I agree and actually prefer the 32 units at 6% at 60% as opposed to the breakup. But again, this is Democratic majority, and so I will be willing to offer that opinion, but certainly understand that others may feel differently. But I do agree and feel that the way that it was originally proposed is our better option.
Letty.
Thanks. So I'm a little agnostic on the 4% versus 6%. Obviously, more units in perpetuity is better, but I want it anchored in data. And so I've raised this concern before where I know anecdotally we've heard concerns that we are not meeting the population in the lower AMIs, but I actually just want to have targets for how many units we need at what AMI levels, at what unit size, and then base these decisions on those goals that we should be reaching rather than our guess and feel that we don't have enough units serving those populations. And so it's a little late right now given where we are with this, but again, I want to make sure that our affordable housing strategy and our decisions are anchored on goals of how many units we need to produce by the year, say 2040. And we have demographic numbers based on the comp plan updates on how many units of affordable housing and total housing we have. So in general, I think that's a request I would have, and I think that's something that the Housing Commission has also discussed as well. I think that would be a better way of kind of figuring out how many units we need at what levels and what sizes.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. So what I haven't heard is any discussion with the developer about increasing their commitment to affordable housing. One would hope that if they're real partners of ours, they'd be willing to do that. Haven't heard that, and I would continue to press for that. Failing that, it seems to me, I think Council Member Hardy's request is a good one, but if we have to make a decision sooner rather than later, I would opt for more units. Thank you.
All right. Let's keep going here. Mr. Shields, do you have anything else, or should we move to the developer?
So I appreciate the discussion about the mix of the units, and I would just say, sort of in terms of what the staff recommendation, the reason for that is that is based on, I think, what our staff experiences and trying to serve our residents, and so while there isn't, we've not had a big policy discussion about this in terms of goals. I think it does reflect what the staff sees when we have our existing ADUs and who is trying to access those ADUs. But let me shift it to the development team. I think they have a few slides to share, and hopefully they've been shared with Cindy so she can put them up. And so I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Wyatt, and good evening, Council. It's nice to be back with you all tonight. I'm Robin Betterell with Hoffman and Associates, one of the partners along with EYA in Falls Church Gateway Partners. We are here tonight to talk about senior living on the project. I know that many people, this has been a little bit of a question mark, who is the senior living partner? What is the senior living building going to look like? And, I will be very candid in sharing with you all, and I think we've shared this previously, that the senior living has been a challenging component of the project to bring to fruition. The sector suffered many challenges during the pandemic. Surely some of it was in the news and was sort of widely seen, and then I think some of it was sort of happening at a very industry kind of operational level that we were hearing about in real time from our former senior partner. I do say former senior partner to let everybody know that the partner that we've been working with for the last 2.5 years has dropped out of the project. They were not able to get it to work for them, did not feel like they had a financeable deal, and sort of walked away from the table at the very final moments of having a deal signed up with them. However, on the bright side, we were very fortunate to already have Trammell Crow companies in the project as a partner with us doing the office building. I think everybody here has heard that announcement. And they had about a year ago, while we were still sort of under agreement with the other group, had asked us, whether there was an opportunity on the senior housing. And obviously at the time we had another group and declined their interest. But obviously when the other group dropped out, they were sort of the first one that we looked to. And I think it's very fortunate for all of us here, given that this is a partnership, and that we have this great operator and great national developer who was able to really quickly step into the shoes and hit the ground running. They've already engaged an architect with Perkins Eastman, Gary Steiner, who you'll meet shortly for a quick presentation. He's one of the practice area leaders in senior housing design, has been for the last 30 years. But I will turn it over to them. I think we are all really lucky to have them. They are a group that has proven performance and that we feel very confident can actually make this a reality. So I will turn it over to Eric Fisher with Trammell Crow.
Thank you, Robin. And first of all, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Perfect. Thank you. Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with the council tonight. Again, thank you. Just briefly as background, I'm both a principal and managing director for Trammell Crow Company, and I directly oversee our healthcare, senior living, and life sciences projects both locally as well as I provide guidance and leadership to our projects throughout the US and Europe. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. I want to strongly emphasize that we are very excited to deepen our commitment to Falls Church with our projects. We're advancing the office component of the project with really good success, and it's one that I think collectively we're all going to be very proud of. Regarding the senior site, what we're here to talk about tonight, we had the opportunity, as Robin said, about a month ago to jump back in, and we proposed a plan to Robin and the team, Huffman and Associates, the team, that we are very confident that it is both implementable and financeable, particularly in a market that's faced a lot of headwinds over the last decade or last 12 to 24 months. I think the specifics before I turn it over to Gary Steiner, just at a very high level, this plan requires a slightly larger senior living residence, approximately 35,000 square feet larger than what was previously called for. So it's 260,000 square feet versus 225,000 square feet. I think notably, this increase in density does not necessarily result in an increase in units. It's really attributable to amenity and back of house support and ancillary space. I think as a global practice leader for that, that is really a reaction to both the pandemic as well as a response for larger units in urban projects like our Falls Church project. So it's really one of a shift in the market. I think just to wrap this up, it's important to note that this is a very proven business model for us. We're currently working on 2 senior living projects right here in the Virginia corridor, and 10 other projects nationally that are in markets that are very similar to Falls Church. I think locally, our Falls Church project, which we're fortunate to have Gary Steiner from Perkins Eastman overview, is modeled off of our 765 John Carlisle Street project in Alexandria. Just for background, that is 268,000 square feet with 215 units versus our proposed Falls Church, which is 260,000 square feet with approximately 218 units. For background, the John Carlisle project closed last Thursday, and we intend to capitalize the Falls Church project with the same partner. And they are very excited. We're committed and looking forward to expanding this very exciting opportunity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary to jump into a bit of the design and a bit of the overview. So thank you very much. Gary?
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council, and staff. What I want to do is spend just a couple minutes telling you a little bit about my firm and us so that you understand where we're coming from and how we've conceived this building. And then we'll just spend a few minutes looking at what the building looks like and how it functions. But my firm, Perkins Eastman, is a global leader in multiple practice areas that tend to converge these days into a lot of different practices such as multifamily residential, healthcare, and senior living, not to mention large-scale planning, of which Westfall is the kind of project that we are very supportive of. I've been doing this now for over 35 years, and I've seen the senior living practice change from what was once a suburban, low-scale, pastoral kind of secluded environment to now what is an urban, mid and high-rise, vibrant street life, transit-oriented, integrated into the fabric of the city environment. And that's what the Westfall Senior Living Project is really all about. So why that's important is because today our seniors are different. They don't really want to be sort of isolated from multi-generational environments. So a walkable community with vibrant street life and transit access like Westfall is really where they want to be and where their adult children think their parents ought to be. And the other thing about this project and the way that senior living has morphed over the years is that the amount of amenity space that we tend to provide these days is considerably more and has been growing and growing because we want to make sure that whole person wellness is addressed with a myriad of different kinds of spaces that can support all the various dimensions of wellness that we want to provide for our seniors. So we provided a wealth of multifunctional spaces, many of them smaller so that group gatherings are limited and exposures can be limited. And that's sort of the premise behind our amenity package in this building. So when we were conceiving this building, could we go to the next slide, please? We had a couple thoughts about what we thought was important in this building. One major goal, of course, was to respect the entitlements that already are in place on this site. So ultimately, the shape and form of this building is going to be very, very similar to what's already been entitled. And that should make things very easy to digest. The other goal was to make sure that we had a timeless and classic building that wasn't trendy and yet was current. So we looked at making sure that we used traditional materials like masonry, this will be a brick building, that we had residential scale, that we were well proportioned, we had lots of natural light, and we had an interplay of materials that allowed the building to be interesting without being trendy. So these are just a couple of the buildings and images of some buildings that we felt were sort of appropriate to what we thought we might want to do here at West Falls. So what does our building look like? Next slide, please. It will be a masonry building. We'll use two different colors of masonry to break up the scale. There'll be a grid that's largely a two-story grid, so the building doesn't seem quite as high as it perhaps might be. We'll use our mid-tone red brick blend and a buff brick blend, the buff being used for accents and primarily at the base and top of the building. And the red brick will be used, which is a classic color, throughout the tower of the building. The penthouse will be stair-stepped so that we will sort of minimize the impact of the skyline as you look up at this building and really try to make sure that the building is as inobtrusive as could be. At the street level, we've decided to enhance the pedestrian scale by providing awnings and marquees at all of the various entrances to the building, and also use those to bring down the scale of the pedestrian experience as you're walking past the building to something that's more of a one-story experience rather than a 15-story experience. From the air, next slide, please. You can see that, and forgive the spelling, there should be an E in that. But from the air, you can see that the building is a C-shaped building. It has a solid base on 2 floors. And on top of that, at the 3rd floor level, there is a courtyard that is enclosed and secluded. And that's going to be for the memory care floor, which is on the 3rd floor. So we'll talk about that in just a bit. But this gives you a good understanding of how the building stair steps at the top, again, as a means to try to break up the scale and lower the implicit height of the building. The next diagram indicates how we plan on stacking the building. So the 1st floor, the street level, is going to be largely amenity space and retail space, with only enough back of house and support to provide loadings and services to the senior living side of the building and to the retail side of the building. We will be planning retail entrances along the side street and along Commons Boulevard so that where the majority of the pedestrian traffic between the parking garage and the rest of the community passes, there'll be retail entrances, and on the main facade, there'll be retail entrances. 2nd floor of the building will be all amenity space for the community. There, we're going to have a variety of different kinds of amenity spaces, including a living room, a lounge, a bar, an activities room, a game room, a swimming pool and locker rooms, fitness room, studio, and so on, as well as a theater, a multipurpose room, and a classroom, many of which are subdividable. So again, we can take these amenity spaces, which can accommodate large gatherings, and also break them down in scale so that we can make sure that groups that want to meet in small, secluded, and safe environments can. On the 3rd floor, we have our memory care floor. It will be totally self-sufficient. It will have all its own support and amenity spaces and the wandering garden in the front. The wandering garden will be contained on 3 sides by the building faces themselves, and on the 4th side facing Commons Boulevard. It'll have a decorative screen wall and arbor that will allow residents to be out there in safety while still providing ventilation and views. The 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th floors will all be assisted living floors. Each one of them will be relatively self-sufficient with its own complement of support and amenity spaces. And what we found is that's a great way to deal with assisted living and handle the environment. We found socially, small neighborhoods or households work the best. You can provide the best care that way. And should there be another pandemic, a small household is less apt to spread infectious diseases. And then lastly, our independent living floors will be found on the upper half of the building. So with that, I'm going to turn it back, and Robin, Bill, Eric, anything else you'd like to add?
I would say, Gary, thank you. There's nothing I'd like to add on my end, and I'll turn it back to Robin related to how you'd like to direct tonight's conversation.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you everyone for the time. We're very excited to present this new senior partner, as well as the beautiful design that they've come up with. I think it shows their commitment to the site and their excitement about the site, that they put this together in the amount of time that they did. We had yet to see a design from our previous senior partner after all the time that we worked with them. And so I think this is a group that is ready to go. They're sort of chomping at the bit to go, and I would just urge council to allow the process to move forward. As you know, there is more process to come once this particular matter is referred out. So thank you everyone for your time, and we hope we can move forward and build on the momentum.
Gotcha. Thank you. So let's open it up to questions and comments from council. Any questions about what we've just seen? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Terrific looking building. I just have one question. Relates to parking. Maybe this is somewhere in the voluminous files that we have on this, but what's your experience in terms of the need for parking for the various components? Obviously, memory care, not an issue for the folks who are being served, but assisted living, maybe, independent living, certainly. There are going to be some automobiles involved. And of course, the staff to service this building, which has got to be very significant. I'm just wondering what your experience is and how many parking spaces you find that you need for a building this scale.
So why don't I'll take that, and then I can actually turn it over to my colleague, Bill Brewer, who has been working closely with me on the underwriting and the capitalization. I think generally this project really takes advantage of being proximate to the metro. So that really helps address staffing in a reasonable and efficient manner. I think that I could say from an industry perspective that parking is very much in flux related to independent care. We're seeing a shift, I would say, toward giving up cars, particularly in these types of urban settings, and really having a less auto dependency longer term. Bill, you've done some parking studies and parking counts based on Carlisle and other projects we're working on. Maybe you can offer some specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eric. Phil, first of all, you're absolutely right. One of the key attributes of this building that we see is its metro adjacency. We do expect most of the employees to take metro to work, which is a real load off of the building from a parking perspective. We are targeting about 150 spaces that would be allocated between residents, staff, and visitors. So that's about a 0.75 ratio. We have been able to work with Robin to meet that requirement inside of the existing garages in the building. So we're not asking for Hoffman to make any changes to the parking that they've already shown to you.
All right. Any more questions, Phil?
No, I think that's all for now.
Miss Hardy? You're muted, Letty. Letty, you're muted. You're still muted.
Trying again. How about now?
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, connection in South Dakota isn't great. Thank you. I'm also a fan of the architecture. I normally don't chime in on that, but it actually reminds me a little bit of the condo building, which I think we were all fans of. And so I think I like how we are tying in both of those buildings together. I just had a quick question. I think when we last discussed this 2 weeks ago, you all talked about not needing an extra floor. And I think I read in the staff report that you are going to go up to 15 stories now. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that we said we didn't need extra floors beyond the 15 height limit that was already approved in the SEE.
Okay, my understanding was that it was going to stay at 14. That sounds like you guys.
I'm sorry, yeah, we might have miscommunicated that and apologize for that. So yeah, we will be doing 15 stories in this plan.
Okay, thank you. That's it for now.
Ms. Connolly?
Two questions along the same lines as Letty. Thank you for that presentation. It is a lovely building. Your picture sort of has it standing there all on its own. I'm curious to know what it looks like with the other buildings around it, because it's not going to be there on its own with small buildings next to it. And then my second question is, what's the total increase in square footage? Because I was under the same impression as Letty that there was no height added and it was just going to become either an E or a C shape. So now I see we have a C shape instead of an L shape, and that additional floor. So I'm just wondering, what's the total square footage that we're adding?
So the request is for 35,000 additional square feet, and the building is actually in the same shape as it was shown in the SEE, which was a C shape. It was just that our previous senior partner had talked about an L-shaped building, and so when I was sort of describing the additional square footage, I used that as an example of how it would be different from what was previously being. But the SEE does show a C-shaped building if you refer back to that density.
That makes sense. And is that but the first two floors there are a rectangle?
That's right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. My question really goes to staff, and I thank the developer for a presentation. So we have a letter from the county attorney of Fairfax, which is in the public comment session, which was summarized earlier this evening. And in that, they talk about opposing any increase in this project. And it would appear that the proposal here would increase the project. So my question for the staff and the city attorney and all of us is, what is the impact and how do we align this and assess it with regard to the Fairfax County letter?
I will thank you for the question, Councilmember Snyder. I will just note that in terms of the boundary adjustment agreement that we have with Fairfax County, what it refers to is the area. It doesn't refer to the density or other metrics. It talks about the area of the property, and it provides a ratio of 70-30 in terms of 70% of the area remaining in school uses and 30% can be used for any use that the city so determines. And so that is the way we've interpreted the county's letter, is that they have questions about the method on which we're doing that calculation. We do believe we're doing the calculation correctly and within the letter of the boundary adjustment agreement. I'll let the city attorney see if she has anything to add to that.
I might just say before she speaks, we do have the possibility of a closed session to hear from the city attorney in closed session to discuss any matters appropriate for closed session, i.e. the giving of legal advice.
Right, and I'll just comment that I agree with what Mr. Shields has said. The 70-30 calculation is supposed to be about acreage. That said, I don't know. I was out last week, so I understood that there were some communications about the 35,000 square feet. I don't know where those stand right now, but I think that they should, under the boundary adjustment agreement, they should not really affect the 70-30, which is about the acreage used for school purposes versus any other lawful purpose.
Again, if need be, Mr. Shields has prepared a motion to go into closed session to have further conversations of a legal nature as they are appropriate for a closed session. Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Thank you. So first I'll say, I think it's great that Gary and the team at Perkins Eastman have joined on. I was immensely impressed with Perkins as part of the school design and selection committee. We had a chance to tour Dunbar High School, which I think, I believe it was Sean O'Donnell's team over there at Perkins that was responsible for that. Gary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just immensely impressed in what you guys have done on the educational side, and just really thought you guys had a great team. So for what that's worth, I'm personally very pleased that you all have signed on to design this project. In terms of design, I am familiar with the John Carlisle project, and I was struck that the design of this seems to be very similar to what is being designed for that project in Alexandria. Is this the kind of standard bearer for senior living design for Trammell Crow or Perkins Eastman buildings? Would we expect to see more projects designed looking very similar in other areas?
So let me, maybe I can just take a quick moment and talk about why we like this design from a Trammell Crow perspective, then I'll quickly defer to Gary from an architectural perspective. I share that these buildings are very intense to construct and operate. So what we like most about this design, what's becoming popular for us as we do this on a national and global basis, is truly a repeatable grid-like floor plate that allows us to do efficient studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and memory care. So if we were to get into floor plates tonight, which I think we probably defer to maybe a later meeting, you'll see that this building stacks extremely well, and it allows it to be supported with really respectful and thoughtful support space and amenity space that allows for the use of common chases and common building systems. So in an industry that faces a lot of headwinds from a financing and capitalization perspective and an operational perspective, this type of design works extremely well for us. And as such, our capital partner or capital partners really look to us to really create this type of design. And it's one where we feel will stand the test of time, not only the next 5 years, but for the next 15, 20, or 30 years. Now with that, Gary, you're the national practice leader for this, and please share.
Sure, thanks, Eric. Just a couple of quick things. The Carlisle site and this site are both rectangular sites with relatively similar proportions, which is nice. But the challenge becomes when you're working in what is generally a residential building with bars that are 65 to 70 feet wide, you really don't have too many options in terms of how you form the tower and still maintain enough natural light into all the spaces. We couldn't build a 100-foot by 200-foot box all the way up. That would make a nice office building, but it doesn't make a nice residential building. So given the square footage that we had to develop on this site and the height limit and the boundaries of the site, we had to carve away at the box, and the C seemed to make a lot of sense. and we proved it in Carlisle. So we decided that that would be an appropriate way to move forward here. From a brand standard and from an iconography standard, I think if Trammell Crow's senior living projects all have a similar look, that's not a bad thing. And then the building can become part of the brand. So those are just some thoughts about how we got to where we are today.
No, and I appreciate that. And that's a perfectly acceptable answer. I mean, there are only so many ways that you can design a building for a very specific use with a specific footprint. So I understand that. We're always striving to be a little bit different than everybody else. If you could imagine that. So anything that we can do to differentiate would be great. I personally prefer, a darker facade. But again, as with Vice Mayor Connolly's question, it's difficult to envision how this fits into the context of the rest of the design without seeing it against some of those renderings for the other buildings. But generally speaking, it's an attractive and handsome building that you guys have designed. So don't take those comments as a negative.
I appreciate the kind thoughts.
So thank you. So who's actually operating and providing the care at the facility? So you guys are designing, Trammell Crow's developing. You've obviously got capital partners as part of Falls Church Gateway Partners. Who's actually providing the services in the building?
So we typically enter into a long-term operating agreement with a partner. So there are multiple companies that we work with. We haven't yet chosen this group, so I just respectfully ask that you allow us time to make that decision in a thoughtful and strategic way, and then we'll share with you who the operator will be. I think it's very much in sync that it's envisioned to be one that is aligned with our current local projects and likewise one that's aligned with us nationally. That way we have good accountability.
That's fair enough. I understand that. I know that this is somewhat last minute entrance into this process. One last question on design. Remind me again, will there be outdoor amenity space for assisted and independent, or is it just for the memory care in that notch on the front?
The notch in the front on the third floor will be strictly for memory care. We haven't developed the floor plates entirely yet, but we think there may be some rooftop terraces on the penthouse level.
Got it.
Could be available to AL and IL residents.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, I think it's it's a great first shot, especially coming in so late to the game. I will say though, I do share the same concerns that Dave Snyder brought up, which is the addition of this density, even though not called out specifically by our neighbors, has created, frankly, some unnecessary consternation on their part. I think, and has to some extent opened up or picked at a wound related to the boundary, which is something that I think that we probably, and I would certainly recommend that we discuss in closed session. And while it may seem inconsequential to add the 35,000, and I said this the last time we spoke, I get it. You guys have got to be nimble and flexible in addressing the needs and some of the changing aspects of this type of use post-COVID. But there are some pieces to this that have come to light just over the last month that have just, again, unnecessarily created some consternation that we need to work through to make sure that we have a viable project here. So if you guys will permit us to have those discussions here, I think that is absolutely necessary for us to figure out and get done. But thank you, Gary and Eric, for joining us tonight. And I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Shields, just following up on your earlier comments and those you've just heard, if we were to have a closed session to receive legal advice from our counsel, when are you proposing that occur, either now or after the rest of our public hearing?
The other items on the agenda, one include another item related to the Westfall's project. And then after that, we have we sort of move to different topics. My recommendation, if it suits the council, is to go ahead and have this discussion in closed session now, The alternative would be to get through the remainder of the business on the agenda tonight and then have a closed session at the end.
I guess my inclination is generally to have it at the end so that the public doesn't leave our meeting and not have no idea when we're going to come back. And therefore, basically, everyone drops off and in our public meeting, it really isn't public, even though technically public, no one's stayed around to see when we might turn back up. So my inclination probably would be do it at the end of the meeting, but I'd be interested in what my colleagues have to say, if anything.
So Dave, is the idea to skip further discussion on these agenda items, finish up, then go to closed session, and then come back to discuss these items?
To the extent there's additional action required or public discussion that is appropriate at this time, have it then.
Well, I will just tell you my opinion is, just considering what I discussed and others have mentioned, what we're going to discuss in that closed session is going to dictate whether or not this even stays on the agenda, these items related to the Westfall Church project.
Okay. So is your suggestion to have the closed session now?
My suggestion is we can have the closed session now or we can have it later, but I don't want to entertain any further discussion on anything related to Westfall Church or have any votes without having that closed session discussion. So that's my preference. Whether we do it now or at the end, that doesn't matter to me, but I don't want to discuss anything else related to Westfall Church until we've had that.
All right. Other thoughts from anyone else on council? All right. Doesn't sound like
So if we were to have it at the end, then we would shift to item 4 on the agenda, which is the budget ordinance amendment, and then item 5, which is the cooperative agreement with Fairfax County on the CDBG grants, and then the consent calendar, then closed session, then we'd come back to items 1, 2, and 3.
Mayor, I agree with Ross. I just couldn't unmute in time.
All right. So why don't we go ahead and do what the mayor or what the city manager just suggested, which I think is consistent with what Ross and Letty just said. So unless there's a further comment or objection, that's what I would recommend. So why don't we go ahead then? It doesn't sound like there is any objection. Move on to item 4. Is that it?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So why don't we go on and move to item 4 then? Do you want to call that item, Madam Clerk?
Yes, that is TO 21-11, ordinance to amend ordinance 2026 regarding the budget of expenditures and revenues appropriating funds for fiscal year 2022 for the general fund.
All right, so I believe several of us at least have a disclosure or disclaimer to make. I'm looking for mine right now. Does either Mr. Snyder or Vice Mayor Connolly have anything they'd like to say at the present? All right, I've found mine, so I'm going to go ahead and make my declaration. I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TO 21-11, an amendment to the FY 2022 budget. My wife is an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by this matter. I can participate in it fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Vice Mayor Connolly or Mr. Snyder, do you have anything you wanted to say?
Sure, Mr. Mayor. Although not required, I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of the budget amendment. My independent adult daughter is an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore is a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by this matter. I can participate in this matter fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Connolly.
I am having trouble opening my disclosure, but I will say that as City Council takes up the budget amendment, I need to disclose that I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and I can consider this matter fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to staff then. Is Ms. Bawa here?
She is, and I'll just introduce this item briefly, then turn it over to our Finance Director, Ms. Bawa. Council is requested with this budget amendment to do just one thing, and that would be to appropriate a transfer in the amount of $1,935,000 from the Capital Reserve Fund to the Economic Development Authority, which would be used for the purchase and preservation and land banking of 2 properties that are currently at market rate affordable status in the city. There'd be a total of 8 units in those 2 properties. We do not have any more detail on those properties. We do not have a contract pending on that, nor does the EDA, but rather this would be a first reading on a budget amendment to provide those funds to the Economic Development Authority so that that acquisition could be made by the EDA. If the council approves this on first reading, what I would propose is that when this comes back to council for second reading, it would be accompanied with a memorandum of understanding between the city and the EDA on the use of these funds and on the return of these funds if and when the properties are ultimately financed and possibly have other sources of funding that can allow those funds then to be transferred back by the EDA to the city, where they'll be returned to capital reserves. At this point, however, because we don't have a contract pending on the property or certainly financing in place, in terms of the staff report, we do need to lay out to the council the possibility that that financing could be delayed, et cetera, and that needs to be part of your financial planning as well. So let me turn it over to Ms. Bawa just to speak to that dimension of it, of kind of where this money would come from and what it means in terms of our overall capital finance planning. Ms. Bawa?
Good evening, Mayor Charter, members of the council. So to speak to the fiscal impact of this, we are proposing to use $1,935,000 from the existing capital reserve. After utilizing, transferring these funds to EDA, we are projecting a balance of $10.1 million at the end of this fiscal year, at the end of next fiscal year, at the end of fiscal year 2022 in the capital reserve. And that assumes we will have $4.5 million from the first payment from the Westfall Church and 1.8 from the VCs from Founders Row. And happy to take any specific questions anybody has, because there is a lot to the fund balance. There is the capital reserve, there is the available fund balance. So this is pretty much at high level what the projected capital reserve is going to be.
All right, is that it?
Yes.
Wasn't sure if you were gonna keep going. Okay.
I'm sure you're gonna have questions, so that's why I want to keep it short.
All right. We do have questions. Letty?
Thank you. I am fully supportive of the acquisition. I'm grateful to staff for kind of working out this Plan B option while we work out the financing. I did have some questions, though, on the health of our reserves. So assuming that we do get reimbursed, I guess in the interim, how does the reserve picture, the $10.6 million, look relative to our financial policies? And then the corollary to that is, let's say we don't get reimbursed within the fiscal year. How does it look in this coming year? And then the third scenario is, let's say worst case, we don't get the Westfall Church payment this year. We don't get the $2 million reserves. Are we still within kind of our financial policies relative to our debt levels?
Let's review them phase by phase, as you said. So if we did not refinance this deal and we crossed over the fiscal year, the $2 million is not going to impact the health or the policy indication of the fund balance and the capital reserve. So we're going to end at $10.1 million at the end of next fiscal year, which is well within our policy, assuming we're going to get. And then the second scenario was that if we did not get the $4.5 million, and in that case, we are able to sustain till the following year. However, a second year of delay would not be within the policy, financial policy. The capital reserve balance will drop significantly. I just want to put a different dimension to it, in the sense that if we look at the current available balance, which includes capital reserve and unassigned and others, since our debt service as a percentage of expenditures is over our initial policy, which was 12%, we are in this new fund balance requirement. So the current available fund balance, we are in a okay position if we look at the absolute worst case scenario for 1 year. Yes, and even for 2 years, we are okay. However, on the capital reserve alone, we can sustain for 1 year in the worst case that the 2 million doesn't happen, the 4.5 doesn't come. However, two years is going to be below the policy.
So I recall that when we did the financial modeling, those kind of stress test scenario was a 2-year delay we could withstand. So I'm hearing you say that if we spent $2 million for this acquisition, did not get reimbursed through the grants or financing program, and then also did not get the Westfall's second payment we're expecting, then that stress test scenario would go from 2 years to 1 year. Is that correct?
It is almost correct. Okay. I mean, okay, so
there's a lot of bad what ifs that could happen in there.
Yeah, it's going to be very close. I also want to remind you that the 1.8 that was on the VCs, we have committed that as a 460,000, like the 1 cent for the next 4 years. So that factored in into the next 4 years, and then also the 4.5 for the second year. It'll drop the capital reserve balance. It's not going to go negative, but it's going to be very close and much below the policy. The policy calls for 3.5 million, but it's going to be below that, much below that. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not advisable the second year.
Got it. So given those what ifs, I guess as our CFO, I assume that you would not be making this recommendation of this plan of financing unless you thought that the risk was pretty small. Is that your conclusion?
Correct. I mean, I feel that the chances of refinancing are very high, given the market, the lending market right now, the borrowing market, I mean, and we should be able to rebound back on this 2 million back to the reserve, and the other reserves, the unassigned fund balance, looking at the 9 month that we have seen, it's in a healthy spot. Also because our expenditures are low, so that's calculated as a percentage of expenditures. So we are expecting some understanding there, as we saw in the 9 month report. And looking at the total available fund balance, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay. That makes me feel better. So again, I think I'm fully supportive of this. I think even without kind of talking about the long-term potential that we've often discussed at the Virginia Village, I think even in the near term, being able to preserve market rate units into permanently affordable units at $250,000 a unit is probably the best deal we're going to have in the city. So I'm glad that we are going to move on this, and I will support this at first reading. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, so let me ask one other question, and I'd like a little bit more detail about the timing. When will we know whether negotiations with a nonprofit will perhaps reduce or eliminate our financial element here? City Manager, I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about that.
Thank you for that question. And if I could refer that to Cindy Mester and to Nancy Vincent on the timing of kind of what we think the timing would be for financing.
Do you want me to answer, Cindy? I'm happy to do that. We've been in discussions with the nonprofit. Don't have a time per se because of the processes that they have to go through with their board, but I would imagine within the next several months.
And for sure, we will have things teed up in order to apply for the Year 3 Amazon grant, which has a September 30th deadline. And these go hand in hand with that. In order to have that grant application, we need to have these issues worked out. So it's in the near term, and certainly the intent is during this fiscal year.
Okay, and you feel relatively optimistic about the negotiations with the nonprofit at this point?
I absolutely do.
You do? Okay, thank you. And I guess there's one other fallback here, which is it's real estate, it has a value. And I am concerned about dipping below our targets. But I guess the final fail-safe, if you will, is that these things will continue, these properties will continue to have market value. And if we needed to maintain our necessary capital to pay for the high school and other critical projects, we'd be able to sell these units if all the other optional financing failed us. So I guess I'm willing to move forward. I like the idea of moving forward. I don't like the idea of reducing our capital reserves to a great extent. But it seems to me that there are several sort of safety valves, if you will, in this case that one doesn't ordinarily have. And certainly the ultimate one being the ability to put these back on the market if we have to maintain the reserves that we have to have for commitments we've otherwise previously made. So I'm willing to support moving forward on first reading as well. Thank you.
All right, other questions or comments? If not, I'm going to ask one or two to the city attorney, and if they're not appropriate for open session, certainly let me know. Could you speak a little bit to restrictions on what the city can do in terms of financing or the EDA? I know there's sort of a lot of hoops to jump through. I'm not sure people fully understand those. I'm not sure I fully understand those. But could you speak to some of the limitations there might be on the city getting financing and sort of why we have to do what we have to do?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is that the city doesn't have authority to hold property and operate them for affordable housing like this. That's why the proposal is to give the money to the EDA. And the EDA does have authority to own property that is used for affordable housing as long as there's an operator who's going to operate the property for purposes of affordable housing. The EDA has the ability to get loans from governmental entities, not say a private mortgage, to buy its property. So as long as there's Virginia Housing or some other governmental form of loan to the EDA, then the property can be financed by them. But they will need to have an operator, which is something I think we're working on getting with the with a nonprofit or someone else to be the primary operator of the property.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Is there any public comment as to this, Madam Clerk?
No, sir.
All right, Mr. Duncan, do you have something?
I was just going to make a motion if it's appropriate.
Go for it.
Mr. Mayor, I move to grant first reading to TO 21-11, schedule second reading and public hearing for July 12th, 2021, and advertise the same according to law.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, who is the second?
I think Hiscott and Hardy, so whichever.
All right, I'm going to do Hiscott as the second and Hardy as the third. All right, so let's now we got a motion and a second and a third. Let's go ahead and have the vote then, Madam Clerk.
Oh, now I'm slow. Sorry, I'm.
Or somebody cooking bacon or something. Madam Clerk.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next item.
Yes, the next item is TR 21-19, resolution to approve cooperative agreement with County of Fairfax, Virginia, Fairfax County Redevelopment and Housing Authority for the Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership Programs, and authorize the city manager to execute the agreement.
Mr. Shields?
Ms. Vincent will provide a brief staff report on this.
All right. Ms. Vincent?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I would like to turn it over to Dana Lewis, who is the Deputy Director of the Department of Human Services, to give the report on this item.
All right, Ms. Lewis.
Good evening, everyone, council members. So this is a follow-up on last May 18th, 2020. Council approved, view your staff report, but council approved resolution 2020-17, and it established 3 things. If you remember, we terminated our cooperative agreement with Arlington County to receive Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership funds, and that is effective June 30, 2021, so the end of this month. And then at the same time, you gave authority to negotiate a cooperative agreement to be effective July 1st with Fairfax County. And then you authorized the city manager to notify the jurisdictions of that action and take other necessary actions to implement that decision. So that's what we've done. We've been working with Arlington to kind of leave them, and we've been working with Fairfax for them to take us on. And so this is the next step of the process. We're finalizing with Arlington to terminate. We've worked with all of the grantees. And so the next step is to get that cooperative agreement in place so that we can start our year 1 annual agreement with Fairfax County to fund our grantees. And so that's the gist. The cooperative agreement has been provided, and I provided the resolution that you all did in May. And so this is just the next step of that process that you all already authorized.
All right, thank you. Questions, comments from council? Is there any public comment, Madam Clerk?
No, there is not.
All right. Any questions or comments from council or a motion? This motion, yeah. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TR 21-19.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Hiscott on the second. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk?
Yes, Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Litkenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Next item?
I believe we are on to the consent items.
That's right. There's a whole lot of them there. I don't know if anybody needs them read or wants any of them taken off. I think we've discussed most of these at last week's work session. Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move the consent agenda, and in so doing, I just wanted to note in the WMATA agreement, we're making clear that we oppose the shutdown of either East Falls Church or West Falls Church metro stations. Thank you.
All right. So noted. Do we have a second?
Second.
And who is the second? I'm sorry. Was that Vice Mayor Connolly?
I did say second. Someone else did also.
Okay. I'm going to go with you, Vice Mayor Connolly, on the second. Any public discussion, Madam Clerk? Any comment?
We did get one comment in support of purchasing the electric vehicles, which I read earlier.
All right. So unless there's any further discussion, let's go ahead and let's go have a vote.
Okay.
Mr.
Ms.
Mayor,
Conley?
I do just want to make two more comments in support of the electric vehicles, but also to commend our 3 direct employees who worked in extraordinary circumstances over the course of this past year that justifies, in my view, the salary proposal. So thank you for work in uncharted territory, which hopefully will find ways to prevent ever happening again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Mr.
right,
Snyder.
Madam Clerk?
Oh, are we ready to call the vote?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm now going to read a motion as discussed earlier by going into closed session. So upon a motion made by Council Member Hiscott, all right, thank you. Seconded by Council Member
Hardy.
I'm going to go with Hardy. And passed upon a vote of City Council. Council went into closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A8 for consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, issues relating to the Westfall Church Economic Development Project, and the establishment of a Community Development Authority. Councilmember Conley?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Lichtenhouse?
Yep.
Hiscott?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yes.
Tarter? Yep. All right, so let's take a short break. Let's say 5 minutes for the cameras to come down. We'll reconvene in closed session at 9:16. Thank you.
And they all magically appear.
All right, are we back in open session here?
Uh,
Or at least in the public can see us?
We are broadcasting, yes.
All right, so we are coming out of closed session. I'd like to read a motion, see if there's any support. Upon a motion made by Council Member
Snyder.
Snyder and seconded by Council Member
Hiscott.
It passed by a vote of City Council. Council reconvened in open session. Councilmember Conley,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Hardy. Letty, are you there?
She needed to come back on by phone.
What's that?
Oh, I see she is there. By phone.
Letty, are you there? All right, I'm going to come back. Lichtenhouse,
Yeah.
Hiscott,
Yes.
Snyder,
Yeah.
Carter, yeah. All right, Letty, you still there? Are you there?
I don't see her. She.
All right, I'm going to mark her as absent. This is our certification upon a motion made by Council Member
Lichtgenhouse.
All right. And seconded by Council Member
Hiscott.
And passed upon affirmative roll call vote in open session. It was certified that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in a closed session or meeting by the body. Council Member Connolly?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
All right. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Hiscott?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yes.
Carter? Yep. And Letty, you had missed our motion that was made by Councilmember Snyder and seconded by Councilmember Hiscott to reconvene an open session. You were not present for the initial vote, but do you agree to that?
I agree.
All right. So that's a yes. All right. So now we're coming back into open session. Is there anything anyone would like to say about the items that we had originally discussed? That's TR 20-29 and TR 20-30. And let's see if there's anything else. TO 21-10, which is the CDA. Is there anything anyone would like to discuss? Any motions anyone would like to make?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah, due to several outstanding issues that we need to have resolved prior to moving forward on these remaining agenda items, I'd like to make a motion to divert TR 20-29, TR 20-30, and TO 21-10 to a later date to give us time to resolve these issues.
All right, let me just ask the city attorney, is it okay that the motion is made in that fashion?
I think it, if any member wants to object to be able to vote differently on the different items, they should raise that. Otherwise, you can do it if there's not going to be anybody voting differently on different items.
I guess we won't know that till anyone votes differently on different
Well,
items.
someone needs to speak up now if they have a concern. So.
All right, if anyone knows what everyone else is going to vote and they're going to vote differently than everyone else, then I guess speak up now.
I don't know how people are going to vote, but I will second Ross's motion.
All right, we have a second on the motion. So I guess I'm going to ask the city attorney, then again, we can take a vote, a roll call vote now on this item. And I guess if anyone votes differently, we'll know that maybe we need to break these up.
Yes, if anybody raise it now or raise it when it's time for you to vote, and then we should break them out.
All right, thank you. So Madam Clerk, will you go ahead and call this vote?
Yes, Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. Items are deferred to a later date.
All right, thank you. So let's move on to business not on the agenda. Is there any business not on the agenda? Any standing regional committee or council liaison reports anyone would like to make? Any council member comments?
Sorry, I had a question about a regional item, if I could.
Yes.
Somebody asked me in town, what is our vote on the TPB matter having to do with the Maryland, Beltway project and so forth? There was a high-profile contentious vote, and there was a follow-up article today in the paper about how that's being reconsidered. Do we vote in that? Do we have a dog in that hunt?
Sure. So, Mr. Mayor, let me respond to Councilmember Duncan's question. So, previous to the meeting, the major issue which I wanted to address as a win-win was the fact that the current long-range plan, which includes projects important to the entire region and to the city of Falls Church, will not meet the region's climate change goals. It will make progress, but it will not meet those goals. Had an agreement not been reached, one would have been forced to decide between projects which have been long planned and meeting our climate change goals. So working with NVTA and with the direct involvement of VDOT, the following basic framework was voted on pretty much, I think, well, with very large votes, certainly from Virginia and other jurisdictions. And that was to do the CLRP, because we all had projects that had sometimes been years in the planning, that the money has been afforded, has been established for it, but commit to do, not to wait for 4 years, but commit to do a new set of projects that will meet our climate change goals. So the objective is we do the projects that we've been working on, and we commit, instead of waiting for 4 years, within 2 years, to do the scenario planning necessary to do those things which will help us achieve our climate change goals. That was basically the approach followed and was agreed to. Surprisingly, however, Maryland did not agree, did not arrive, did not present to the region an agreement on 270. You had two different approaches, one from the state of Maryland, which would have called for widening, and another from Montgomery County that would have called for reversible lanes. There were significant, what should I say, strong rhetoric on both sides in Maryland. You see, in Virginia, we resolve our issues. We don't ask the region to do it for us. That division occurred, a vote was taken, and I abstained on that issue. Then the vote was to remove the 270 project totally. Then the vote was taken on the overall approach, the overall architecture that I was talking about before, minus the 270 lanes, and that vote passed, and that's what the TPB decided upon. The hope is now that Maryland will get its act together and will come up with something that's agreeable to both the inner jurisdictions and the state of Maryland to do something that will be valuable for the American Legion Bridge and 270.
All right, thank you for that explanation. Does that do it for you, Phil?
I think so. It'll be interesting to see what happens next.
All right, any other comments?
I had
yes.
one other, if nobody else does, but I'll wait if others
No,
do.
please, just go ahead, Phil.
School resource officers. So both Alexandria and Arlington have, I think, recently decided to remove school resource officers from their schools. I would, as a matter of policy, like to be aware of what our police department's thinking of doing in that area, and without prejudging, whether we should or should not retain them. I would just express some concern about particularly the high school with the construction that's going to be going on up there, and a lot of people who are, moving in and out of that area over the next couple of 3 years, if all goes as we plan, that we have a law enforcement presence around, certainly, and maybe in the high school. But that's just a first opinion. Mostly what I'm interested in is being aware of whether we're going to consider doing what Arlington and Alexandria have done, and if we are considering that, to have a community dialogue about it.
All right. Thank you. Other comments? Questions from anyone? All right. Is there any final words anyone wants to say? Would anyone
To adjourn.
What's that?
Move to adjourn, buddy.
All right, we've got a motion to adjourn. I imagine we have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. We're adjourned. Have a great evening.
All right.
See you soon. Thank you.